honour and pleasure of now handing over to a conversation, or to beginning a conversation with the legend that is Caz Walton. For those of us who are Paralympics nerds like me, this is a special moment indeed. And maybe we can spotlight Caz for this, because it would be great to see her talk rather than the slides, because I just would love to ask you a couple of questions, Caz, and thank you so much for joining us today. Firstly, I guess an introduction. So Caz is a retired wheelchair athlete and former Great British team manager. She was a multidisciplinary gold medalist and competed in numerous Paralympic Games between 1964 and 1976, and won a whole host of medals in a series of sports. And took a break before coming back to support athletes. And I think this is Caz's second Tokyo Paralympics. So, I mean, just to that point alone, we have to honour our opportunity here to ask, what was your experience of the first Tokyo Paralympics, Caz? And Julia, maybe we can see Caz.
It was an extraordinary games for me, but I guess everybody's first games is extraordinary. And I was just so fortunate to be here, because I'd only been competing internationally for about a year. I was still pretty young, and I wasn't originally selected. And somebody went sick with about 3 weeks to go.
I didn't know that.
Yes, and I got hauled in, and I turned up in Tokyo, not even really knowing quite what I was going to be competing in. So it was a very pleasant experience for me, and an extremely exciting one. I'd never been out of the country before, so to come to Tokyo and have that experience and differences in culture and it was just phenomenal for me, and it began a lifelong addiction. It's the only way of describing it, I think. But it was a very different world in those days. So because places weren't particularly accessible, then we weren't able to get out and about and see things outside of competition very much. It's a bit like COVID today, actually.
So it's quite similar, your experience of Tokyo during the Paralympics.
In that respect as well, which is a shame, because the accessibility has changed so much, of course. But I do have an enduring memory of the warmth and the willingness of the people, the volunteers, to help, to do everything that they could, and to put on what turned out, certainly for me, to be an absolutely fantastic games.
Perfect. And I guess that's really interesting, because the accessibility in Tokyo has changed, right? I know that TOCOG and the city have been working, and the cities have been working so hard to try and make a difference.
Yes, they certainly have, and the public transport is very accessible. I came out about 3 years ago to do an access survey for Paralympics GB, and I was amazed, because things were so accessible. The transport was accessible. I'm talking from a wheelchair perspective, but in actual fact, it was just a better experience all round for any type of disability. I mean, what a joy and delight to be able to find accessible toilets in every station, and to be able to get on and off of trains and buses with ease. It was just it was something that I'd like to experience for the rest of my life.
That's amazing to hear. And actually, while we're talking about technology and using a wheelchair and being able to get around the place, it's a good time to sort of reflect on, how do you think the technology's changed? Thinking about kind of the experience of athletes in 1964, and then now in Tokyo 2020/21, it must be a really different experience in terms of the tech that people are using, whether it's to compete or to help training. What do you think?
I think technology has given a huge degree of independence to people with a disability, and I don't know whether it isn't always, of course, generated by sport, but There've been huge innovations in wheelchair design, and the technology that they use for racing wheelchairs, for instance, or wheelchair basketball, has been extended and disseminated down, so that I hope that wheelchair users generally benefit from it, because you've got lighter wheelchairs and wheelchairs that are more tailored to individual needs. And the same goes with things like prosthetics. I mean, who'd ever heard of a blade back in the day? And the sort of blades that are used for racing and for field events, for instance, are used in everyday life now, but not in the same form. So it's been beneficial from top to bottom. I think they used to call, I've heard sport called a war without weapons, which perhaps is a little harsh, but it's true in a way, because technology advances, I think, at a speed during something like a war, because the impetus seems to be greater, so you get faster change. And I think that's something that Paralympic sport in the main has been able to generate, because it's been needed at that level, but it has actually filtered down and benefited, I hope, everybody.
Caz, that's such an important point, because a war without weapons reminds me of the way that a lot of innovation and technology is driven. So with a mission, with a really clear mission that people need to drive for change, whether that's winning a war or putting a person on the moon. And oftentimes that's when we see the acceleration of a lot of technological innovation. So I love that, a war without weapons. It's a nice way of thinking about it. And of course, now we've got Johnny's Blade Camp on the telly. So it's quite a different scenario to the one that you began in, no?
It is indeed. Back in the day, I remember that when I came to large competitions with other disabled people, it was the only time I felt normal. And that's, well, certainly for me, is no longer the case. I can go pretty much anywhere and feel equal and have confidence that I'm as good as anybody else, which is not the way I started out.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful, because of the change in societal attitudes.
Yeah, I think there's been a huge shift in perception. I wouldn't say that we're there yet, and some countries are further ahead than others. But it's one of the gifts, I think, that the Paralympics can help to give you, because it has the focus and the publicity to drive that message.
That's such a strong point. And actually, with the IPC and Loughborough University, GDI Hub screening the Paralympics for the first time in 49 countries in sub-Saharan Africa on free-to-air television this year. And we did that because we think, imagine if you'd never seen the Paralympics, what would your perception be and how would it be different? We think it makes a difference. But I wonder, what do you think in terms of how the Games can impact the perception of disabilities?
I think they do, and I think you mentioned London earlier. Yeah. I think London was a side shift in the way that disability sport was perceived. Yeah. And I can remember. I can't even talk about it without getting.
Exactly the same way. I know how you feel.
I remember sitting in the stadium and the audience just concentrating on the performance rather than the disability. It's exactly what you would want. It's exactly what you'd want as an athlete and as a disabled person.
And we need the tech to work to make that possible, right?
Yes, we do. I know we do indeed. I mean, and I hope that every innovation, whether it be improving sporting equipment for people, like cycling or archery or shooting, can benefit people doing grassroots sport. Once you get the costs of the development out of the way, and it becomes more affordable, then hopefully it will benefit everybody.
I love that. I love that idea. What a wonderful way to leave our chat. I would love to talk to you all day, Caz. I'm so grateful to you for spending the time. Just before I move on, what are you most looking forward to seeing? Whose performance? Give us your top tips.
Top tips. Well, I'm certainly not going to pick any individuals out, but I hope that the Paralympics GB, being slightly biased on the British side, will do as well as, if not better than the Olympic team did, because they showed us the way. We have a tremendous team and a huge team spirit, and just looking forward to showing the rest of the world what we can do.
Or a bit better, right? Thanks for the warm-up, Team Olympics. Caz, thank you. And I'll be coming to our Japanese colleagues to hear who the top tips are on the Japanese team as well later on. Thank you so much for your time today. It's been a pleasure to listen to your reflections on an amazing journey, and also slightly choked myself, which means it's time to